Hello everyone, you're watching The Ultimate Cover. UN Security Council fails to agree on Israel-Hamas war as war toll crosses 10,000. In a concerning turn of events, the UN Security Council convened on Monday to address the ongoing Israel-Hamas war conflict. Despite over 2 hours of closed-door discussion, an agreement on a resolution remains elusive. The United States is advocating for humanitarian pauses, while several other council members are pressing for a more decisive humanitarian ceasefire. The goal is to deliver urgently needed aid and prevent further civilian casualties in Gaza. US Deputy Ambassador Robert Wood acknowledged the difference within the council, stating, "We talked about humanitarian pauses, and we are interested in pursuing language on that scope."
We talked about humanitarian pauses, and we're interested in pursuing language on that score, but there are disagreements within the Council about whether that's acceptable.
Earlier in the day, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed his urgent plea for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. He emphasized the violation of international humanitarian law, which mandates the protection of civilian and essential infrastructure. Guterres condemned the action, stating, "No party to an armed conflict is above these laws." He also called for the unconditional release of hostages taken by Hamas from Israel to Gaza during the October 7 attack.
Nothing can justify the deliberate torture, killing, injuring, and kidnapping of civilians. The protection of civilians must be paramount. I'm deeply concerned about clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing. Let me be clear. No party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. The way forward is clear. A humanitarian ceasefire now. All parties respecting all their obligations under international humanitarian law now. This means the unconditional release of the hostages in Gaza now. The protection of civilians, hospitals, UN facilities, shelters, and schools now. More food, more water, more medicine, and of course fuel, entering Gaza safely, swiftly, and at the scale needed now. Unfettered access to deliver supplies to all people in need in Gaza now. And the end of the use of civilians as human shields now. None of these appeals should be conditional on the others. And for all of these, we need more funding now.
The gravity of the situation prompted China holding the Security Council presidency this month, and the United Arab Emirates, the Arab representative on the council, to convene Monday's meeting. UAE Ambassador Lana Nassif stressed the seriousness of the crisis in Gaza, where more than 10,000 civilians have lost their lives in less than a month.
The United Arab Emirates and China called for this meeting to express grave concern at the continued attacks by Israel on hospitals, refugee camps, schools, UN premises, places of worship, and other civilian facilities in the Gaza Strip, including most recently on the Jabalia and El Maghazi refugee camps, El Fakhura School, and the Dar El-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. As the Secretary-General stated this morning, this is a crisis of humanity. In less than a month, more than 10,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been killed. And as we speak, Palestinian civilians continue to be killed. Children are bearing the brunt. As several UN officials have stated already, Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. No one is safe more. No one is safe. More UN aid workers and journalists have been killed in 4 weeks than in any month of a conflict in decades. If ever, Palestinian civilians are also deprived of necessities essential to their survival. In the midst of this catastrophic situation, We emphasize the need for the Security Council to act with urgency and adopt a meaningful and actionable resolution. Over the past couple of weeks, members of the Security Council have been working tirelessly to this end. We call for an urgent humanitarian ceasefire. The Secretary-General just made the same call this morning, a humanitarian ceasefire now. This is desperately needed to enable full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, including for UN and humanitarian personnel, consistent with international humanitarian law. We urge all parties to take steps urgently towards a cessation of hostilities to ensure the protection of civilians. We demand that the parties to the conflict facilitate the continuous, sufficient, and unhindered provision of essential goods and services to all civilians throughout the Gaza Strip. These must include electricity, water, fuel, food, and medical supplies sustained and at scale. Ambassador Nusseibeh will continue.
As we heard today in our briefings, civilians in Gaza cannot even find safety in UN facilities, schools, hospitals, and refugee camps. These civilian facilities have been under attack in violation of international law. It is imperative that their protective status is upheld. We condemn all violations of international humanitarian law, all violence against civilians, including all acts of terrorism and indiscriminate attacks. We condemn the 7th October attacks by Hamas on Israel. We also condemn the indiscriminate attacks by Israel on the Gaza Strip. We express our grave concern at the continued detention of hostages and demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as their safety, well-being, and humane treatment consistent with international law. But the killing and maiming of children, attacks on schools and hospitals in the Gaza Strip, and denying children access to humanitarian assistance are all very grave violations against children. We call on all parties to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We reiterate the need for the parties to take measures to ensure the safety and well-being of civilians and their protection, as well as humanitarian and medical personnel, UN personnel, and journalists. Wars have rules, and they must be upheld. Thank you.
Efforts continue as all 15 council members remain fully engaged, striving to bridge the gaps and reach a consensus on a resolution. The international community watches anxiously as this crucial discussion unfolds. Bureau Report, The Ultimate Khabar.